Oh, hey, this is David. I wanted to take a look at the opening credit sequence for Plan 9. It's kind of moving backwards, but it's interesting. Let me show you. So here I am in 1955. I've got my computer, I've got my software, and I meet Ed Wood and say, you know what, I can do a better job. I can do a better job than your special effects people. I can do it real cheap. Let me show you. So my goal is, I'm not going to try to do modern graphics. I could if I really spent some time on it, but I just want to impress Ed Wood. And uh, I've got a gravestone here, not much more impressive than the cartoons that they originally had. I'm just beveling in some shapes, make it look a little bit more interesting, and then I'll work on working the text into the gravestones, very much like you see in the original. Now, that gets tricky, and I'll show you why. This, Lightwave and other 3D programs will let you make a pretty straight up letter and extrude it into 3D. And sometimes they give you tools to bevel the edges, but creating this chiseled look that I'm going to try to cut out of the gravestone, that's that's something you have to do manually. And with a T, T is about the simplest letter that can be, well, other than I. But the curved letters, the O's and the S's and J's and G's and so on, it's a lot of work to make it look good. I'd spend that work, I'd spend that time doing that if I really was working on a movie, even for Ed Wood. But for now, for this YouTube video, I'm just going to do some nice beveling and see if I can get away with that. Even beveling, you'll see, causes a lot of problems as vertexes kind of overlap each other in the corners of certain letters, and that'll screw up your rendering if you're not careful. So you got to hunt down all those little pieces. The S's are notorious. Sometimes M's, well, you won't see that. I only show you working on Tor's name. The other names in the cast I kind of left as an exercise for the reader. I'll show you the finished pieces after that. Here I am slicing through to simplify. I've created on the front of the tombstone an incredibly complicated polygon with a lot of pieces, and sometimes those break when you go to render. And you help it out. You can help it out a little bit with slices here and there to simplify the geometry. Alright, now I've got all my gravestones done, working them into my very simple graveyard, which I just did with some shapes. You're not even going to see it. I decided I'm not going to try to work on the ground. I could have put in grass and nice textures and so on, made it look a little more realistic, but I'm going for even spookier than that. Kind of a pitch black night with a flashlight and working through the graveyard. That's the concept I'm working on here. I had to paint myself a little texture that's supposed to look like a flashlight. If you shine a flashlight up against a wall in a dark room, you'll see it's usually not a perfectly smooth white circle. So I tried to kind of emulate the variabilities in the beam that you see sometimes. As just working on the animation before I get to that point, though, you see me moving the camera. I've got to cover like a 15-second part of the credits here, so I counted out 450 frames. And now I'm moving the camera along. I don't get the timing quite right, and something like this, you don't expect to get it right on the first pass. But I'm not going to do much more than a first pass. I kind of did some tweaking after this, but this is what you see is what you get. Okay, that lump in the background was supposed to be a grave. As I said, you're not going to see it. Here I am stretching out the whole timeline so it fills up my 450 frames, my 15 seconds. I'm reviewing it just by kind of dragging the slider. I don't like the motion here on Tom Keen, so I have the camera kind of slide up and over Tom, just as a variation. That N is way too big, but okay, you live and learn. Yeah, here's my flashlight texture. Kind of weird looking as a bitmap image, but as a when the light projects it, it makes a little bit more sense. Here we are looking through the lens of the flashlight, and what I got to do, I got to kind of match the motion of the camera with the flashlight, not as though the camera was carrying the flashlight, but just kind of moving alongside it. And I added some shakiness to the flashlight's movement, so it looks almost like it's in someone's hands as they're walking. And I want to make sure that the flashlight lights up the gravestones at the right time when the camera's there to look. As I said, when you do an animation, you kind of do one quick pass and see how things are as you drag the slider around. Maybe even do a preview so you can see, how things work in wireframe. Because you don't want to render out, 15 seconds of animation or more. Maybe take overnight, maybe longer, and then find out your animation was wrong. So you got to be careful with that sort of thing. Here the flashlight moves away too quick. You got to fix that. Oh, that's a little bit better. And Vampira. Oh, very good. Yeah, my next task after this will be to texture these and to set up the environment that we're rendering in, so it looks scary and somewhat realistic. As I said, just trying to do better than what Ed Wood did in 1955. Yeah, I've set myself a pretty low bar. I think the next project I'm going to work on will be maybe something from the 60s, something in color. Give myself more of a challenge. This was just kind of a stupid idea to start doing some YouTube videos and get some practice in 3D rendering. And, I'm not challenging myself enough. I do better work than this all the time. Just kind of for fun. Alright, so you see the effect of the texturing coming in. This is, as I said, a procedural texture. It doesn't use an actual photograph. It just uses mathematical calculations to mark up a surface and give you ways of making things look dirty and gritty, and give them bumps and shiny spots and dull spots and so on. It's more of an art than a science, and I've been doing it for 20 years, so it's hard to summarize. I'm going to render pretty soon just to see what it looks like, but you haven't seen the final yet. I'll show you that at the end. I just wanted to get a little base texture down and test it a few times. Here comes a test render. Yeah, it's not enough variation, not enough contrast between names and stone. But I worked on that a little bit later and I improved it some. It looks okay in black and white though. Now, as for the logo, the movie's logo, I did this work in Illustrator. Just used 3 different fonts. Made it a little futuristic there where it says outer space. I can take that file into Modeler and extrude it out a little bit. I don't need to extrude it much. I could have left it 2D, but I'm going to introduce it with a 3-dimensional animation. So I'm working on that now. I'm setting up a kind of a fisheye lens camera, and I want a dramatic angle. I want kind of a Dutch angle, or a, what you'd see in a Batman movie or something from the 60s. So this is the final position I want the logo in, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it in time, and then I'm going to go back to the beginning of the animation and then move it out of frame. Well, not exactly out of frame. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to add some fog in the distance so that it doesn't appear right away. I want it to kind of zoom into view and do that pretty quickly. Okay, here's my fog. It's gray fog right now, but I'll make it black soon enough. And I thought, outer space, make this a little bit more interesting. I'll have stars. I'll add stars so it looks like space, and the name comes shooting forward. And then I had a brilliant idea. I thought, Might look interesting if the logo coming in actually scattered the stars as it did, as though it were bigger than the stars, or I don't know what it's supposed to represent. It just was a cool idea I thought I had. Once again, these things you got to do them and look at them and then decide after you've rendered something out. And for Plan 9 for Ed Wood, Mr. Ed Wood, I'm sorry, but you're getting first draft stuff from me. That's all there is to it. I want to keep these videos normal, short and normal. All right, as I work through the dynamics of making the logo a collision object, you can see it's starting to move some of these particles as it slams into them. But I don't want them all moving in a straight line as I hit them, so I add the shape of the collision object to be a sphere. So watch this. As it comes forward, scatters the stars in all different directions. That's the idea. The lighting for a scene like this, very simple. Just one light. Just the idea is light up the logo, and nothing else needs to be lit. The stars themselves are going to emit their own light. Okay, that's going to work. Time to work on the stars. Now there's a little technique called hypervoxels. It comes out a little blobby at first. My stars are too big and they're melding into each other. So here we go. That's a much more normal shape, size. This is black and white, so just making them white is going to work. Give them luminosity and nothing else. And already we've got some motion here. I test this out a bunch of times. I'm going to render a scene right now. And yeah, you'll notice the motion blur has broken everything into 3 pieces. And you can see it here, my motion blur passes. If I change that up and try another render, you get a much more smooth and natural look to the blurring. Every once in a while, you know, each of these frames is a 30th of a second. And that goes by pretty quick, but you can actually see that somebody has done trickery like this. If you watch some special effects, you can see this, just some discrete items in each frame that tell you that they used 3D software to do their motion blur. Right here I'm adding a little quiver to the end of the logo's movement. I don't like how it just suddenly stops, and I want to give it kind of a shake. That was a bit of a big shake, so I'm going to keep tweaking this thing. It lets me set amplitude and speed and the displacement. I even have to mess around with the phase a little bit so the motion looks more natural. That's looking pretty good. Alright, this all works for me. I'm going to render everything out, edit it together, and we'll see how it compares to the original. Man, I love doing this stuff. Alright, see you soon. We'll try something new.